The kitchen was quiet except for the occasional drip from the sink, an irregular rhythm that had been driving me crazy for days. I had ignored it at first, dismissing the sound as nothing more than an occasional nuisance. But tonight, with my husband still at work and the house unusually silent, it seemed louder, more persistent, more impossible to ignore. So, when my husband's friend had offered to stop by and take a look at it, I hadn't thought twice about saying yes. I stood by the counter, arms crossed, watching as he knelt beneath the sink, sleeves rolled up, fingers working deftly around the pipes. The toolbox lay open beside him, a mess of wrenches and pliers scattered around his feet. He had been at it for a while now, muttering curses under his breath as he adjusted something deep in the cabinet. I shifted my weight, glancing at the clock. "You sure you don't need help?" He chuckled, shaking his head without looking up. "Unless you suddenly became a plumber in the last 5 minutes, I think I got it." I smirked, leaning back against the counter. "Just thought I'd offer." His voice was muffled as he reached deeper inside the cabinet. "Nice of you, but I wouldn't want you getting your hands dirty." Something about the way he said it made my breath catch for half a second. Too low, too casual, too effortless in a way that sent a quiet ripple through me. I swallowed, forcing myself to look away, to focus on the sink instead of the way his shoulders flexed beneath his shirt, the way the muscles in his arms tensed as he worked. He was just fixing the sink. That was all. A small clatter broke my thoughts as he adjusted something, a tool slipping from his grasp. I heard a soft curse, followed by a rough exhale. "You okay down there?" I asked, peering over the counter. Yeah, he muttered. "Just a tight spot." I hesitated before stepping closer, resting my hand lightly on the edge of the counter. "You need me to hold something?" A pause. Then, "Yeah. Actually, yeah, come here." I crouched down beside him, the scent of metal and faint cologne filling the small space under the sink. The warmth of his presence so close sent an involuntary shiver down my spine, but I ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. Here, he reached for my hand, guiding it toward a pipe. His grip was firm, roughened by work, his skin warmer than I expected. "Hold this steady." Just like that. I nodded, keeping my fingers tight around the pipe as he worked, the proximity making me hyper-aware of every shift, every movement. The air felt thick, suddenly heavier, the space beneath the sink much smaller than it had been a few seconds ago. His arm brushed mine, just slightly, just enough to make my breath hitch. I forced myself to stay still, to focus on the metal in my hands, but it was impossible to ignore the heat radiating off him, the way the air crackled with something I couldn't name. Another adjustment. Another brush of contact. This time, he didn't move away so quickly. I exhaled, my grip tightening around the pipe. "You almost done?" A beat of silence. Then, "I don't know." His voice was quieter now. "You in a hurry?" I swallowed, the weight of the moment pressing in, thick and undeniable. I should have laughed it off. Should have pulled back. But I didn't. And neither did he. The warmth of the confined space felt more noticeable now, the scent of him mixed with metal and soap, something grounding and solid. His arm brushed mine again, deliberately this time. Not an accident. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt the slow, careful way he adjusted his position. Not rushing. Not hesitating. Just waiting. "You okay?" he asked, voice lower than before. I nodded, but I didn't speak. I wasn't sure what words would come out. He smirked, just barely, just enough for me to notice before he reached deeper into the cabinet, the fabric of his sleeve skimming along my skin again. "Almost got it," he muttered. The way he said it sent something unsteady through me, my fingers gripping the pipe tighter, my body rigid in a way that had nothing to do with discomfort and everything to do with something else. Something neither of us had acknowledged yet. He turned slightly, close enough that I could feel his breath against my shoulder, warm and slow. "Still good." I forced myself to exhale, nodding again, still not trusting my voice. A few more adjustments. A few more lingering moments. Then, he exhaled, sitting back on his heels, stretching his arms above his head. "There," he said, voice rough with exertion. "That should hold." I let go of the pipe slowly, feeling the tension still coiled in my shoulders, in my fingers. "Great," I murmured, pushing back onto my feet. "Thanks." He followed, slower, watching me in that way that made my breath come just a little too fast. "No problem," he said, but his voice had an edge to it now. Something different. Something unreadable. I turned toward the sink, reaching to test the water, but I could still feel him standing there, still close, still watching. And for some reason, I didn't move away. The moment hung between us, thick and unmoving. The sound of running water filled the silence, but it did nothing to drown out the weight pressing into the air. I could still feel his presence behind me, steady, unshaken, waiting. The warmth of his body so close sent an unfamiliar shiver down my spine, my fingers gripping the edge of the counter as if it could ground me. "Looks like it's working fine now," I murmured, forcing my voice to sound normal. Even. Unaffected. "Yeah," he said, but he hadn't stepped away. Hadn't moved at all. I exhaled slowly, the heat of the kitchen mixing with something else entirely. The way he had been watching me under the sink, the way his fingers had lingered just a second longer than necessary, none of it felt like an accident. "You always this quiet?" I asked, half turning to look at him. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Only when there's something worth paying attention to." The way he said it made my stomach tighten. I swallowed, feeling the weight of his gaze travel over me, slow, deliberate, like he was memorizing every reaction. "You should probably wash up before you go. There's a towel over there." He didn't move right away. Instead, he reached forward, fingers brushing past mine as he turned off the faucet, the lightest touch but enough to send a sharp current up my arm. I held my breath, waiting for him to step back, to let the moment pass. He didn't. Instead, he leaned in just slightly, voice dropping. "You want me to go?" The words sent a quiet shiver through me, my grip tightening on the counter as I processed the weight of them. The intention. The challenge hidden beneath the easy tone. I hesitated too long, probably. His smirk deepened, like he had caught something I hadn't meant to show. "Thought so." The air between us crackled with something unspoken, something neither of us dared to name. His fingers flexed against the counter beside mine, close but not touching, waiting for something, for me to say something to stop it. I didn't. His breath was steady, deliberate as he watched me, his gaze sharp, assessing. "You gonna pretend this didn't just happen?" I exhaled slowly, the tension coiling inside me tighter, thicker. "Did something happen?" A quiet chuckle. "You tell me." I should have walked away. Should have put space between us. Instead, I found myself standing still, caught between something that shouldn't be happening and something I didn't want to end. His hand hovered near mine, close enough to feel the heat radiating between us, but he never touched me. Just waited, like he was daring me to move first. And I didn't. The sound of a phone vibrating on the counter snapped me out of it. My breath caught, my body stiffening. His gaze flickered to it. "Your husband." I exhaled slowly, the moment breaking, splintering into reality again. I reached for the phone, glancing at the screen. "Yeah." His expression didn't change, but something in his stance shifted, a quiet understanding settling between us. "You should get that," he said, voice steady. I nodded, pressing the answer button, my voice smoothing over like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just been standing too close, like I hadn't just let something coil too tightly between us. "Hey," I said, voice light, even as my pulse was still racing. My husband's voice came through the speaker, casual, unaware. "How's the sink?" I glanced at his friend, at the quiet smirk still playing at his lips, the heat still lingering in the air between us. "It's fine," I said, exhaling. "Everything's fine." He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to, because we both knew this wasn't over. Later that night, after the house had gone quiet again, I stood in the kitchen alone, my hands resting on the cool surface of the counter, my mind still tangled in the memory of what had almost happened. I told myself it was nothing. Just a moment. Just a small lapse in judgment. A little too close. A little too long. But I knew better. Because even as I stood there alone, staring at the sink that no longer dripped, I could still feel the weight of his presence, the ghost of his touch, the echo of his words lingering in the air around me. And I had a feeling I wasn't the only one replaying it in my head.